I worked with Dudley Bates a number of years ago when he was on the board of Lynx, and my goodness, some things don't change for the good. That's great to see.
There's 9 years between our reigns of terror.
There you go. Well, there's some continuity there. Nevertheless, let me just say thank you again for inviting me. It is a great honor. I have a few words for you today in terms of what you call a presentation. I opted not to do a PowerPoint, just have a conversation with you. So I want to offer a few comments, and then time permitting, just to engage in a conversation with you. First of all, I will say without any doubt, in the transportation realm, this is the greatest change that, as an industry, that we have ever seen. Certainly in my lifetime, I would bet your lifetime too. There's dramatic things that are going on that are transforming the landscape relative to transportation. That's very exciting. So those of us who are practicing in this field, I think, are excited by the challenges that we have. For those that are new to the field and looking to make transportation their life's long work, this is the best time to be here. I can tell you in the prior 40 years, not a lot changed. I mean, we made innovations of some kind in transportation and certainly in public transportation, but the changes that are upon us now are far more dramatic. So let me tell you a little bit about the state of transit, but starting with what is APTA, right? The American Public Transportation Association. We are a public-private partnership, a not-for-profit group that brings together the public sector and the private sector. Our members are the transit agencies, from the very largest to very small bus systems that operate across the country. Lynx, thank goodness, is a mayor, is a member, and Metroplan is a member because we include not only agencies but also NPOs, state DOTs, as part of our membership group. We have over 1,500 member organizations, so the public side is complemented by the private sector, and so all the business members who are equipment suppliers, car manufacturers, rail car buses, engineering companies, contractors, they're all members of our organization. And we have an overarching goal, and that goal is to bring more investment in public transportation at a national level to complement what's going on locally so we can build better, extensive, more efficient transportation systems locally. That's our overarching goal. We have 3 major priorities within that: advocacy, this issue of mobility, which I'll touch on briefly, and workforce development. In the area of advocacy, obviously being in Washington, D.C. as a trade organization, one of our principal roles is to make sure that we are the voice of the industry at the national level. So we work very closely on the Hill with the administration to make the case for more investment. Very pleased to say in the last 2 fiscal years, federal fiscal years, we've had the highest levels of appropriations of ever for transit, about $16 billion a year. That's the good news. The not so good news is that we're woefully underfunded. Much like many communities are in terms of public transport. So there's a $90 billion backlog of need just to bring the systems up to a state of good repair, which is the terminology we use. The most glaring examples are in New York City or Washington, D.C., where I'm from, and that is while those systems have very extensive networks, they've delayed for reasons of not having the resources to make sure track and signals and communication systems, rolling stocks, are upgraded and kept to where they should be. The impact of that is reliability suffers. When the system is not operating the way that it should, it means less reliable service, it means unhappy riders, unhappy employers, it means usually a drop-off in ridership. So there are efforts afoot across the country, but some of these larger metro areas to make that additional investment. We're arguing for that investment at the federal level. How that translates into smaller systems, let's take a Lynx system, is that it still needs state of good repair to make sure that the bus fleet is up to the standard that it needs. You don't want to have 20-year-old buses operating for your patrons. You want to have a young fleet. You want to have the resources to be able to do some experimentation relative to new propulsion technologies like electrification, which I'll touch on in a minute as well. So that's a driving force for us on advocacy. I'm sure you've talked here about the FAST Act, which expires at the end of September of 2020. That's a critical milestone for us. We need to really rally the forces to get an authorization passed that addresses both highway funding and transit, because they're companion pieces. Gary mentioned a moment ago a bill that's been introduced in the Senate that addresses only the highway title. The way that they're organized is that there's different jurisdictions amongst the committees, and so the banking committee has the jurisdiction of the transit title. That's not yet been addressed. Of course, it has to be taken up in the House as well, that has their own ideas about reauthorization. But making sure that we deal with that in a timely fashion is critical. Let me make a point about that. We have seen really increased interest in infrastructure investment. We're disappointed that over the last year nothing has happened at the federal level. There was talk that the administration and the president and the leadership in the Senate and the House had some keen interest in a separate infrastructure bill. That doesn't look like it's happening. Time has kind of gone past, but this reauthorization is so critical now. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, not a group that you would expect to be out there to be advocating for public investment of this level for infrastructure, has in fact done that. The U.S. Chamber has proposed a gas tax increase of 5 cents a year over 5 years, 25-cent total. And they have been very vocal about it. We're part of that coalition, as a number of other associations are as well. So for those that may think, well, this is not really a business issue, this is a community issue, not business, nothing could be further from the truth. Businesses, employers understand today that they need to have a competitive environment and infrastructure in place to attract the kind of talent that they need. So we're pleased about that. I think the coalition is strong, but we've got to get the political will to make that happen. The other area is this mobility, which has really changed the dynamic about what is happening here across the board, whether we're talking about roads or we're talking about public transit. You have experienced it here, I'm sure, the advent of the so-called TNCs, the Uber and Lyfts, which have really changed the dynamic quite a bit. Part of our advocacy effort is to our agencies to help them make this transition. And I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call, quite frankly, for transit agencies over the last couple of years, that they need to think about the future differently, perhaps, than they have been. Now, it doesn't mean that what they provide is going to go away. We are strong believers that the backbone of the system, the transportation system, will still want to be a public transit network that's extensive and reliable. So we're all striving for that. But the way they go about that, the way that we look at partnership opportunities, the way that we evaluate our services to make sure that they're as efficient as they can be, that we complement them with other services where it makes sense. First mile, last mile was mentioned a moment ago, so critical to tying in that kind of operation to our fixed network, whether it's Sunrail or other services that we're talking about. Making sure that we have an extensive enough bus system that can serve as a collector and distributor of those riders. These are all things that have to come into play. And I'm very pleased to say there's a lot of experimentation going on all across the country. One of my jobs is to make sure that, quite frankly, people don't come away thinking, you know, transit, that's yesterday's news. It's going to be all autonomous and new technology. We're not going to have to do a thing. We'll be kidding ourselves if that's what we conclude. The reality of it is that we have an opportunity here to gather up and leverage the technologies that are there, not only for the benefit of the automotive world, but for transit as well. And that's what's happening around the country. We have systems today that have developed new partnerships with TNCs where it makes sense, where they've done different kinds of services like microtransit to address some of the lower density areas, where they've reimagined their bus networks, which should happen. Many systems, I will tell you, have not really evaluated their bus systems fully in years. And demographics change. People's movements change. And so the need to look at the bus network and reevaluate, reassign resources in a way that you're going to generate the kind of ridership that's necessary is really high on the agenda as something that's happening today. The other is the area of autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of experimentation going on. It's exciting. It will eventually transform where we are. I'm a believer, though, that it's not going to happen in the time frame that people are thinking it will. And we have to be able to separate the marketing and the hype from the reality. Autonomous vehicles are coming, but it's not next year. It's not in 5 years. It's going to be decades before it becomes part of the mainstream of what we do. It's not to say that we're not going to see, and I'll take a transit example, that a very geo-fenced alignment of a bus route or a BRT will be autonomous. And that's fantastic, that will happen. But the notion that it's right around the corner, we're all going to be driving or sitting in our cars autonomously driven, self-driven, and that's going to happen anytime soon. It's not there. At least that's my opinion, given who I've talked to in the discussions. If you talk to the car builders today, the car manufacturers, they're using words now very carefully, reflecting just that reality that it's not happening. And they're also moving to a new model. They're not quite sure what this new model is going to be. Car manufacturers may not be selling as many cars, nearly as many cars to you and I as at a retail level. They may be selling or operating fleets of automobiles that will be shared by others. That's one key trend to look for down the road. Electrification is another, as we see electric vehicles. Again, they're also going to be deployed on the transit side. Transit already is a leader in terms of the number of electric vehicles that it's operating in the system. And again, what I mentioned a moment ago, this autonomous fleet issue really does play for transit as well, has great potential for us. The other area is workforce development. I don't have to tell you, I know everywhere I go, whether it's a business or a public entity, a local government, workforce is on everybody's agenda. How do you get the training to people? How do you get the skill sets so that they can move forward to provide the jobs of the future? We have a whole number of programs that act at helping our agencies and members deal with that issue. So it's truly an exciting time. I will say to you that while all of our efforts are concentrated principally at the federal level, we don't ignore the local communities as well. We have an extension of our organization of APTA called CFTE, Center for Transportation Excellence. And what they do is provide front-end strategic advice to communities when they consider ballot measures. They don't run campaigns, they don't really get involved in that level of detail, but up front they'll provide that advice. We recently just were working with the city of Phoenix, and Phoenix, if you've read the news, just about 2 weeks ago, turned down an effort where there was opposition to them to continue to expand their light rail network. And by a vote of 2-1, they prevailed, meaning they turned that away. Phoenix will continue to expand. What was interesting about that was that in 2008, Phoenix opened up its first light rail line, 20 miles of light rail. And everyone said, well, gosh, Phoenix is so auto-driven, don't even bother to do that. Yet the leadership and the champions there for that system worked hard. It opened. It's carrying 50,000 riders a day today. It exceeded their ridership numbers the first day of operation, and it's generated some $10 billion of investment along the 20 miles of that original line. That's what the people of Phoenix had as a comparison. So even though the opposition was very strong to say no more investment in the rail side, let's not do it, the public perception, public understanding was so great that they turned that away. So the opportunities are great. The industry is moving forward. There's new investment coming in. Communities, by and large, when they understand the issues, they will actually vote to tax it themselves to do it. The 15-year history on that is over 70% passage rate for ballot measures across the country, saying yes, more revenue for transit investment. I think that is the biggest indicator of where the public is on these issues. How they're positioned, how they're executed, I think is really the detail that has to be examined. But there's strong public support. All the polling that's been done, not by us, by others, that ask people, how important is infrastructure investment in the country? How important is public transit investment? The number's around 80%. So people get it, they do understand, but we have to have this foresight and the wherewithal to bring those forward. So I'm going to stop there and see if you've got any questions for me. Maybe we can have a conversation around those.
Great. Questions for the board?
Yes, Vice Chairman. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I just had to see if you can just address the role that some of our transit agencies play in this crisis that we call affordable housing.
Well, it's a key issue, and we have many meetings and discussions amongst our agencies about that. There's this confluence of affordable housing, homelessness, and just the affordability and availability of transit. I don't know that anybody's come up, quite frankly, with the solution. You know, there has been and continues to be this big effort to try and do transit-oriented development, to generate housing that's relatively in proximity to transit. That's key. Of course, that has some of its pitfalls that you've got to be careful of as well. That may not be as affordable in some cases that we want to make it. But there's no question about it that the linkage between public transit and availability and very affordable housing is very clear. And so I think all the attempts are, from the agency's part, to work with their local infrastructure, their local agencies and community groups to do their planning together, so that they're planning new routes, new facilities, new services. That kind of thinking can be factored into it. Again, the commonality of interest between the housing side and the transit side is very close. And it's well documented, so you can go from city to city and see those who have extensive networks, how they've attempted it. It's not that it's perfect in terms of their approach, but it very much is part of their thinking and planning.
Any other questions? Mayor?
Well, yeah, if I could, thank you, Paul, I appreciate you being here. Conceptually, everything is connected here. So we've got employment, we've got education, we've got, affordable housing. These are all issues that, none of which are all going to be able to be addressed within the same municipality, the same county, but that connectivity of being able to get to where you need to go, in some efficient fashion. And you mentioned specifically your, was it CTE group that helps with
yes,
some
CFT, Center for Transportation
right.
Excellence, right?
Right, and those are things that I'd be interested to hear more, or be able to contact them and hear more about their success and their challenge and the challenges they can help us address with ballot initiatives on whatever level it might be. So
We'd be happy to help you.
yeah,
provide that
great. I
information.
appreciate it, Paul.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Person?
Hi, Paul. This 5-cent gas tax rise for 5 years being proposed, I understand. Do you know if there's a portion of that portion to transit or just a random raise to roads?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right now in the Highway Trust Fund, there's a penny out of the resources there that's dedicated to mass transit, to public transportation. The notion is that it would be that equal share portion going to transit versus the highway. So we are together on this. My colleagues on the highway side, we're not in the business of back and forth fighting over this. We're saying, hey, look, we have needs here that are the transportation network, and we're going to work together to advocate for that. So, and the chamber has recognized that as well. So the proposals that they put on the table really are to do just that, resources across the modes. And I will say, many of you may know this, the last time the federal gas tax was increased was 1993. So it's been more than a quarter century. There's only 40%, 50% of the purchasing power, even in those resources. And that's why we're in the predicament we're in with this needed investment.
The problem ultimately, though, is that the gas tax model fails. And there have been conversations in Congress about road use fees or vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah.
Did you hear any of that conversation related to the gas tax? Because the gas tax is bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've said is, if you look at the vehicle mile tax, it's been tested in a couple markets, Oregon being one. The reality of this is just not ready for prime time. And so the notion is, go to a mechanism that we know works, it's easy to administer, and look at that as the solution probably for the next 10 years, and then transition over to a vehicle mile tax. I think that's the thinking, and it does come up in every conversation. You're exactly right that there are those that feel strongly that maybe the gas tax days are over, we need to look at something different. But when you really look at all the alternatives, the gas tax has been in place. It's so easy to administer in terms of where you collect the data that you need to make those calculations and payments, that it's the most efficient way for the immediate.
And ultimately, the argument should ultimately, it's a fairness issue. 50% of the cars are riding free now, or will at that point. So, the fairness, that's a way to attract people's attention. That's my opinion.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, Mayor.
Paul, thank you for being here as well, and we're proud to have somebody that was from our community being one of the leading voices on transportation issues in the nation. You probably know that Mayor Demings is leading an effort towards a ballot initiative for November of 2020. I just asked you to reach out to them, and he's not obviously here at this meeting today, but I think they would be wise to make use of your foundation and some of the information you might be able to provide as we start this effort.
Mayor, thank you. We certainly would make ourselves available, and myself personally, for the obvious reasons of my connection here. But yes, absolutely, we'd be happy to do that, provide whatever support we can.
Right. Anyone else?
Amen. Thank you, Mayor.
Paul, quick question, and I want to follow up on what Commissioner Shipley was talking about, affordable housing, workforce housing. Every time we do zoning changes, everyone says, well, there's access to transit. Well, the access to transit, when I see rezoning is, could be half mile away, 2 miles away. That's not really access. And then when they are closer, I've said this many a times that it is no fault of Links. We don't have a transit system, we have a bus system. Because I've always asked, what's the intervals of picking up people and dropping them off? And that's what really attracts not just affordable housing, but workforce. What's the intervals? And as many times I ask that question, I can never get a real answer.
Yeah. Well, you touched on it, you're exactly correct. I mean, look, Lynx is a good system. It's doing what it can within the resources that it has. It can't do more unless it has the more resources, and so it's a very fundamental question. Clearly, your ideas, your efforts here, if I'm not mistaken, really are to see, can you build a more robust transit network? And that's really the question, because a lot of these issues you really can't address fully unless you really have a much more extensive network in place. And so, we're a very competitive society. We look at what our neighbors are doing, we look at what communities are doing, and I know you all have done that as well, looking at other cities, urban centers, and saying, what are they doing? Can we learn from them? What are they learning from us, right? Central Florida is a great community, set of communities. There's a lot for others to learn from here. But I will say to you, just in the last 20 years, if you look at those communities that have taken that major step, they're all moving to major investments in public transit in a big way. Whether you're talking about, a Charlotte, whether you're talking about Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland, Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, they're all moving in that direction with increased investment. There's, while we all like to talk about private sector investment, which is real, public-private partnerships, they're happening today everywhere we go. You need the seed money to build the public transit network. You need the public resource to be there in order to attract more resource. And so, I think a fundamental question for the community, for you all to grapple with is, how do we get there? Is it something we want, number one, and how do we get there? Today, not being critical of it, but Central Florida is pretty much a one-dimensional transportation network. And people today, certainly the younger folks that are living in urban centers, they're all about mobility. They're not wedded to the automobile. When I grew up, perhaps when you grew up, we were all excited about getting that driver's license and the first opportunity to get a car. The millennials today, the younger people, this is their car. This is their car. And quite frankly, I'm trying to keep up with them because I've got my transit apps right here. So every morning, I don't own a car. I live in DC, so I have the luxury of that. I don't own a car. I take the bus and the metro rail just about everywhere I want to get, and then I plug that in with an Uber or a Lyft when I need to get to some place that won't serve me well. But this is my passport, so to speak, that gets me to those opportunities. People today want choices. They want freedom of mobility. The automobile is certainly one of those major players. I'm not taking anything away from that. But by and large, our communities seek more. And again, if you need any reinforcement, I know Central Florida and Orlando chased after the Amazon, as did 238 other cities and areas. What was so prominent in their proposal amongst their criteria? Richness of the transit system, the network. So no surprise they selected New York and they selected the Washington, D.C. metro area. Why? Because hey, they're expensive, they're congested, but they've got transit networks that give people more freedom of mobility and choices, and are attractive to bring in the talent and the workforce that they believe that they need. And you can look at examples all around the country. I'm picking out Amazon because everybody knows them, but the reality of it is there are employers, not with the notoriety of an Amazon, that are making those decisions every day about where to locate, where to attract, and to serve the workforce.
Well, what could potentially be our next step after you leave here today? How can we help ourselves to get there?
Well, my experience, again, I've been away for a while, but my experience are, like many urban centers, regions have done great studies, right? In most cities they've got them on the shelf, they've done great studies. The difference makers, can you take those ideas, those plans, and step it up to some kind of an execution? to take the next step to execute. And you really have to come to terms with what does the community want. If you can figure that out, help to put together a plan to implement that. It's complicated to execute. It's not complicated in terms of concept, right? We do it every day. We ask ourselves, what do we want to be? How do we achieve it? What kind of a job do I want to hold? Where do I want to live? We make these judgments in the sense of the community, the region here. What do you see as your next steps? Where do you want to be? What do you think you need to do to kind of fill out your portfolio of being the most attractive or one of the most attractive places to be? I mean, it already is. I'm not arguing that Central Florida is not a very attractive place. But again, the hunt for talent in the country, well-educated workforces and such, tend to move to the urban centers, and they tend to want a range of services available to them so they can make choices of where they want to live and how they want to commute. I could have chosen in DC, I'm not maybe the best example of this, to be 15 miles out, 20 miles out, and pay maybe a third of what I might. I have the luxury of saying, I don't want to fight, an hour or hour and a half trip in every day. I want to be able to take the bus to work and be there door to door in 20 minutes, which is what I have. Now, I drove in this morning from our place in New Smyrna Beach. Now, unfortunately, it was an accident that happened. It took me an hour and 45 minutes. Now, I know I can do that typically in an hour 15, not racing, although everybody else is. So it took me an hour 45. Those are the choices that people want to be able to make, and you need to have a multitude of options for people to do that.
Any other questions?
I have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Paul, you mentioned several times about creating a robust transit system. And we all know that many agencies are working towards that. But then you have a transit industry like Uber or Lyft that comes in and kind of disrupts that. Do you foresee any other transit industry? Because I think I was watching Good Morning America, and you had a gentleman who had to get to work in New York City, and he used his jet ski to drive, to ride, to get on the other side of the Hudson River. And so now people are actually thinking about using their jet skis instead of trying to maneuver traffic in New York City, and so you just never know what industry might pop up in the future. So
no, that's very true. I don't think anybody's got a crystal ball. I would pretend to tell you that somehow I know exactly what's going to happen. I don't. What I do know, though, is that we can expect to have a network of services, both public and private, that will serve our communities. One of the drawbacks, Uber has been kind of a wake-up, right? Look at this new service, it's so cool. You can get on the app and you can do it, and that's fine. There is a question whether that business model will even survive over the next 5 years, because they were losing billions of dollars. But if it does, it will likely do it in niches, meaning that serving certain population demographics. We can afford it on occasion to use an Uber. Everyday person can't do that to go to jobs. So where public transit fits in, where these other things don't, is that it's the issue of equity, it's the issue of affordability, and it's the issue of access. Not everyone has that. That's a private business. It's going to pick out its niches of where it can make money at some point. Public transit is serving a broader good. And I think those are the kind of things we need to be thinking about. But exactly what new technology, they're going to come out. But I'm a real believer, though, that the transit will harness all these various technologies for the benefit of its operations, to be more efficient, to be more readily available to people. It's already happening.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I could editorialize for another 10 seconds. Okay, or 10 days. This requires leadership on our part, and committed leadership on our part, to commit to the open understanding of that this is. There's so many choices, and I love the jet ski thing, at least in the summertime. But again, these are just imaginative, creative solutions to problems that we all have. And there is a greater public good that's to be derived from just the profit-making side of it. And you put it very aptly earlier. This isn't an if, this is a when, even in regards to autonomous vehicles. The George Jetson float up in the air stuff is another day. Maybe that takes another couple of years. We got to park things. We've still got to move people around. So Either way, it's requiring that we, even in the public participation plan that Cynthia and Mary Ann talked about, we have to get out in front and lead. And I'm not sure that we've always seen that we've been as committed to it as our mouths want to say in this room.
Well, just again, an observation, I think you ought to be commended for what you have done, and that is undertaking and implementing Sunrail, which was not easy to bring together the region.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will continue to be, notwithstanding what you said, Mayor, about Volusia, that will continue to be a unifier. But again, you understand that, you build one line. You haven't built a transit system.
Yeah.
It's, the road system is ubiquitous. We can take it everywhere. The transit systems aren't. And especially in a community like this where it's much more limited. So it's never going to be ubiquitous, but until you develop more options, connect the network, so to speak, amongst the modes, you won't be there. But you've taken some major strides. You got, the Sunrail operation in place, maybe some extension of that. You've got now the Bright Line Virgin trains that are going to be coming in. You have some assets there to build on, and a basic link system, which again probably needs to be expanded,
Yes.
and you need to continue to develop that. So tying in this network is within your reach, and you've got some assets that others don't have.
And can only be as creative as the resources that we allocate to it.
Correct.
Again, it's a matter of commitment. Walk the walk.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You actually brought up what I was going to ask about Bright Line Virgin.
Can you move the microphone over, please?
I was going to ask about the Bright Line Virgin. I mean, how is that going to do a whole lot for our systems here when it really is only going to stop at the airport and go back to Miami?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an inner-city system, right? So it's not a local system per se, but you can build off of that, right? It gives you now another attraction in terms of a public transit mode, together with Sunrail, together with the bus system, that you can begin to network and knit things together that, again, will increase, I think, the mobility for the region. So you're exactly right. It's not intended as an urban, only an urban-centered system, but you're tying it now to other parts of the state, which is a nice asset to have. And it looks like they're going to do that. And the same group now has picked up the franchise for a Vegas to LA connection. So they seem to be really serious about building that.
Yeah, it's a real estate. That's what it is. It's a real estate.
Yeah.
And it's okay for it to be all about money.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's
Yeah,
the only way it's going to work.
Any other questions?
Money.
Paul, can't thank you enough for coming in.
Thank you very much. Great to see all of you, and anything that I and we at APTA can do to help you, we will be there. Thanks so much.
We'll be reaching out again. Thank you.
Excuse me, Commissioner Clark.
Yes, sir.